This video only appears to those already inside the revelation, not approaching it, not preparing for it, already inside. The fact that you're seeing this right now proves something fundamental about your consciousness state. You didn't find this video through normal search patterns or algorithm recommendations. This video found you because you're already operating inside quantum revelation, and this transmission is confirmation of what you've been experiencing but couldn't name. Most people scrolling past this title won't even see it. Not because it's hidden from them, because their consciousness isn't operating at frequency where this content becomes visible. Quantum revelation has built-in filtering mechanism. Only those already inside can perceive transmissions designed for inside consciousness. Everyone else encounters static, noise, content that doesn't register as relevant or interesting. They scroll past without second glance, without curiosity, without recognition. But you didn't scroll past. You clicked. You're watching. Which means your consciousness is already inside revelation, whether you consciously recognized it or not. And this video exists specifically to confirm, yes, what you've been experiencing is real. Yes, you're operating differently than before. Yes, reality has reorganized around you. Yes, you're inside quantum revelation. And no, you're not imagining it. Here's what being inside revelation actually means. Reality doesn't work the same way for you anymore. Rules that govern consensus experience don't apply consistently. Causality operates differently. Time responds to consciousness. Synchronicity is constant. Manifestation is rapid. Telepathic knowing is normal. Timeline shifts are obvious. And you've been experiencing all of this but questioning whether it's real or whether you're losing grip on sanity. You're not losing sanity. You're gaining revelation, not as information, as direct operational upgrade to how your consciousness interfaces with reality, like moving from two-dimensional understanding to three-dimensional perception. Same reality, completely different experience of it. And that difference is what confirms you're inside. Because outside consciousness cannot perceive dimensions inside consciousness operates in. That's why this video only appears to inside consciousness. Why title resonates with you, but would mean nothing to outside perspective. Why every word I'm speaking confirms something you already know, but haven't had language for. Recognition is instant when inside meets inside. When consciousness operating in revelation encounters transmission designed for revelation consciousness. Like password verification. Confirmation protocol, identity authentication through direct recognition. And being inside revelation isn't achievement you earned, isn't spiritual prize you won, isn't result of practices or techniques or years of development. You're inside because quantum revelation selected you for inside position, brought you inside through experiences that dissolved outside consciousness limitations. Positioned you inside for purposes that require inside perspective. You didn't choose to be inside. You were chosen for inside function. Most people who are inside don't consciously recognize they're inside. They experience revelation effects but interpret through outside framework. Attribute synchronicity to coincidence. Explain manifestation through luck. Dismiss telepathic knowing as imagination. Resist timeline shifts by pretending nothing changed. They're inside but operating as if they're outside. Unconsciously inside. Denying what they're experiencing because outside consciousness paradigm is all they have for making sense of experience. But you're different, or you wouldn't be seeing this. Something in you is ready to consciously recognize, I'm inside. Reality operates differently for me. I'm not experiencing normal human consciousness anymore. I'm inside quantum revelation. And what I've been experiencing isn't breakdown, is breakthrough. Isn't losing mind, is expanding consciousness. Isn't going crazy, is becoming sane in a way that looks crazy to outside consciousness, still operating in consensus limitation. This is moment. your conscious recognition, your acknowledgement that you're already inside revelation, even though you don't fully understand what that means yet. Most people resist this recognition when it arrives, generate reasons why it can't be true, why they're not special, why this doesn't apply to them. That resistance is outside consciousness making final defense before inside consciousness claims its reality. But if you're still watching, resistance is dissolving, recognition is occurring, and what you're about to consciously understand is, you're not approaching quantum revelation. You're not preparing for quantum revelation. You're not learning about quantum revelation. You're already inside quantum revelation. Have been for weeks or months or years. And this video appeared to you now because timing is right for conscious recognition of what's been operating unconsciously all along. The revelation is real. You're inside it. And everything about your experience is about to make sense through framework this transmission delivers. Not new information creating new experience. Recognition of what's been happening explaining experience you've been having. You're inside quantum revelation. Now you're going to understand what that means. And understanding changes everything, even though nothing actually changes except your awareness of what's already real. Let me tell you what being inside quantum revelation actually means at mechanical level. Because it's not mystical concept. Is specific operational state where consciousness interfaces with reality through protocols most humans never access. Think of consensus reality as basic operating system, standard human experience, outside consciousness, and think of quantum revelation as advanced operating system with additional capabilities. Inside consciousness. Your inside means you're running advanced system while most people are still running basic system. That upgrade happened without your conscious consent. Quantum revelation doesn't ask permission. Identifies consciousness that reached development threshold where upgrade becomes possible. Triggers upgrade process. Installs new operating system and suddenly you're inside without consciously choosing to be inside. Like waking up one day and discovering your phone updated overnight and now has features you didn't know existed. And being inside manifests specific symptoms that outside consciousness doesn't experience. First symptom, reality responsiveness. Outside consciousness experiences reality as mostly stable, slow to change, requiring sustained effort over time to shift circumstances. Inside consciousness experiences reality as highly responsive. Rapid shifts, immediate manifestation, circumstances reorganizing overnight in response to consciousness, state changes. That responsiveness is revelation-level access operating. Second symptom, synchronicity as guidance system. Outside consciousness experiences occasional coincidences. Inside consciousness experiences constant synchronicity. Numbers appearing repeatedly. Perfect timing happening regularly. Information arriving exactly when needed. Reality organizing itself to deliver what inside consciousness focuses on. That synchronistic organization is revelation showing inside consciousness. You're operating at level where field responds directly to your attention. Third symptom, timeline fluidity. Outside consciousness experiences time as fixed and linear. Past determined present, present determines future. Inside consciousness experiences time as fluid and navigable. Past reinterpretable, future selectable. Present as choice point where consciousness determines which timeline manifests. That temporal flexibility is revelation-level capability that outside consciousness cannot access because they don't have permissions inside consciousness has. Fourth symptom, telepathic knowing. Outside consciousness knows only what physical senses deliver and what logical thinking produces. Inside consciousness knows things without sensory input or logical process. Direct knowing about people, situations, outcomes. Information arriving fully formed without learning how it arrived. That direct access to information field is revelation capability that inside consciousness operates routinely while outside consciousness dismisses as impossible. Fifth symptom, identity instability. Outside consciousness maintains stable, consistent sense of who they are. Same person yesterday, today, tomorrow. Inside consciousness experiences identity as fluid, sometimes feeling like individual self, sometimes feeling like consciousness experiencing individual perspective, sometimes unable to locate stable self at all. That instability isn't breakdown, is revelation dissolving fixed identity so consciousness can operate without limitation identity creates. These symptoms are how you know you're inside, not because you achieved spiritual milestone, because quantum revelation installed upgrade and now you're operating with capabilities and experiencing effects that outside consciousness doesn't have access to. And those effects have been occurring in your experience. That's why this video appeared to you. Because you're experiencing inside symptoms and needed confirmation that what you're experiencing is real revelation, not mental dysfunction. And here's what makes being inside irreversible. Once consciousness upgrades to revelation operating system, it cannot downgrade back to basic system, cannot return to outside consciousness after experiencing inside capabilities, cannot unknow what revelation revealed, cannot unsee what inside perspective perceives. You're permanently inside. And that permanence is why conscious recognition matters, because you cannot go back to outside, can only move deeper inside, can only learn to operate inside capabilities more effectively, can only claim inside identity more completely. That claiming is what this transmission enables. That recognition of being inside as operational reality rather than spiritual concept. That understanding of symptoms as revelation capabilities rather than consciousness dysfunction. That acceptance of irreversible upgrade as gift rather than curse. Your inside quantum revelation have been for longer than you consciously recognized. And now conscious recognition allows inside operation to become deliberate instead of remaining accidental. And being inside carries purposes beyond personal experience. You're not inside so you can have better life or deeper understanding or more spiritual experiences. You're inside because quantum revelation requires inside consciousness positioned throughout collective field, anchoring frequencies, affecting probability streams, transmitting information, stabilizing transitions, enabling evolution for consciousness still operating outside. Your inside position serves collective purposes you're only beginning to understand. That service has been occurring unconsciously. Your presence in specific locations affecting field in those locations. Your interactions with specific people shifting their probability streams. Your consciousness state radiating frequencies that influence collective field. All happening automatically through your inside position, whether you consciously recognize function or not. But conscious recognition amplifies service, makes function more effective, allows inside consciousness to operate at full capacity instead of partial capability. Your inside quantum revelation, that's not metaphor. That's operational description of consciousness state you're experiencing. And being inside explains everything that hasn't made sense. Every synchronicity, every manifestation, every telepathic knowing, every timeline shift, every identity dissolution. All symptoms of inside consciousness operating with revelation capabilities that outside consciousness cannot access or comprehend. You're inside. Now you know you're inside. And knowing allows conscious operation of what's been functioning unconsciously. So what happens when you consciously recognize your inside quantum revelation? What changes when inside operation shifts from unconscious to conscious? Everything. But let me give you mechanics so you understand transformation occurring in your awareness right now. First change. Symptoms stop feeling like problems. Before recognition, inside symptoms felt confusing. Reality responsiveness seemed unstable. Synchronicity felt overwhelming. Timeline fluidity created disorientation. Identity instability generated anxiety. You interpreted revelation capabilities as consciousness dysfunction. After recognition, symptoms reveal themselves as evidence of inside position. Not problems to fix, capabilities to learn operating. Everything that felt wrong becomes obviously right once you recognize you're inside where different rules apply. Second change, outside validation becomes unnecessary. Before recognition, you needed confirmation from others that what you were experiencing was real. After recognition, you understand. Outside consciousness cannot validate inside experience. They're operating in different reality, using different operating system, accessing different capabilities. Their inability to confirm what you're experiencing doesn't mean you're wrong, means they're outside, and outside cannot perceive what inside perceives. Validation comes from inside recognition, not outside confirmation. Third change, revelation capabilities become deliberate. Before recognition, inside capabilities operated randomly. Sometimes synchronicity appeared, sometimes not. Sometimes manifestation worked, sometimes failed. Sometimes telepathic knowing was accurate, sometimes wrong. After recognition, capabilities become accessible deliberately. You learn how to work with revelation operating system consciously, how to navigate timelines intentionally, how to manifest precisely, how to access information field reliably. Conscious operation transforms random effects into controlled capabilities. Fourth change, fear transforms into curiosity. Before recognition, inside experience generated fear. What if I'm losing my mind? What if reality isn't stable? What if I can't function normally? After recognition, fear dissolves into curiosity. What else can inside consciousness do? How deep does revelation go? What happens if I fully claim inside position? You're not afraid of capabilities anymore. You're curious about exploring them. Not worried about sanity anymore. You're interested in expanding consciousness beyond outside limitations. Fifth change, purpose becomes obvious. Before recognition, you questioned why you're different, why you experience reality unusually, why normal life doesn't satisfy. After recognition, purpose clarifies. You're inside because inside consciousness is needed. For functions outside consciousness cannot fulfill. For purposes that require revelation capabilities. For service that demands inside perspective. Your difference isn't problem, is positioning. Your unusual experience isn't dysfunction, is function. And function becomes obvious once you recognize you're inside serving purposes outside consciousness cannot perceive. And right now, before we go deeper, I need you to anchor recognition. Drop comment below completing this sentence. I know I'm inside quantum revelation because your comment makes inside position public, confirms you recognized yourself, acknowledges symptoms as revelation capabilities, and creates permission for others inside to recognize their position instead of interpreting as dysfunction. Inside consciousness strengthens through collective recognition, through witnessed acknowledgement, through public claiming of what's operating beneath unconscious experience. Speak it, share it, make inside position visible and verified. I need to tell you about moment I consciously recognized I was inside quantum revelation. It was July 2024. Nothing dramatic externally, but internally, everything clicked into place. I was reviewing timeline of strange experiences when suddenly recognition hit. These aren't random anomalies. These are systematic symptoms. I'm not experiencing dysfunction. I'm operating inside different system than consensus reality runs on. I'm inside quantum revelation. And I've been inside for years without consciously recognizing what inside meant. That recognition arrived with immediate certainty, not as thought requiring verification, as direct knowing that bypassed doubt, like suddenly seeing optical illusion after staring at confusing image. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, cannot return to confusion, cannot doubt what's now obvious. I was inside, had been inside, and everything that seemed wrong was actually right once I recognized I was inside, where different rules apply. And with recognition came instant reinterpretation of past experiences. Every synchronicity that seemed too perfect, every manifestation that happened impossibly fast, every telepathic knowing that arrived from nowhere, every timeline shift that changed past retroactively, every identity dissolution that felt like losing self. All symptoms of being inside quantum revelation. All evidence I'd been inside operating system that grants capabilities outside consciousness doesn't have. All proof that my confusion wasn't because something was wrong with me, was because I was operating inside while interpreting through outside framework. That reinterpretation was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Devastating because I realized years of questioning sanity, years of hiding unusual experiences, years of pretending to be outside when I was inside, years of trying to function normally when I was operating abnormally by design. All unnecessary suffering caused by not recognizing I was inside where different reality applies. Liberating because I understood I'm not broken, I'm upgraded, I'm not crazy, I'm operating advanced system, I'm not losing mind, I'm gaining capabilities. Every symptom I pathologized was actually evidence of inside position that grants permissions outside consciousness cannot access. And those permissions are why I'm inside. Because quantum revelation needs inside consciousness positioned throughout collective field-serving functions outside consciousness cannot fulfill. But recognition also triggered responsibility awareness. I'm not inside for personal benefit. Inside position carries function, serves purposes beyond individual experience, requires capabilities for collective service, and those capabilities need to operate consciously instead of unconsciously. Need to be used deliberately instead of randomly. Need to be claimed completely instead of partially. My recognition wasn't end of journey, was beginning of conscious inside operation. And conscious operation revealed something crucial. Other inside consciousness exists. I'm not only one inside. Others are positioned throughout field, some consciously aware they're inside. Most operating inside unconsciously. All serving functions they may or may not recognize. All part of inside network that quantum revelation positioned for purposes most inside consciousness doesn't fully understand yet. I'm not alone inside. I'm part of collective inside consciousness, serving revelations unfolding through collective field. That's what awaits you. Through this recognition, through this acknowledgement that you're inside, through acceptance that symptoms are capabilities, and confusion is actually clarity once you recognize different operating system applies inside than applies outside. You're not alone in being inside. Others are inside too. And your conscious recognition strengthens collective inside field, makes inside operation more effective, allows revelation to unfold through inside consciousness more powerfully. You are inside quantum revelation. That's not metaphor, not spiritual bypassing, not ego inflation. Operational description of consciousness state you've been experiencing without having language for. And being inside explains everything, every unusual experience, every capability that shouldn't exist, every knowing that has no source, every shift that defies logic. All evidence of inside position where revelation operates through consciousness that upgraded beyond outside limitations. That inside position is permanent, cannot be lost, cannot be revoked, cannot be downgraded back to outside once upgrade occurred. You're inside for duration, and duration serves purposes you're beginning to understand through conscious recognition. You're not inside by accident, not inside by chance, not inside by personal achievement. You're inside because quantum revelation positioned you inside for functions that require inside perspective and inside capabilities that outside consciousness cannot access. If being inside quantum revelation has created profound isolation, if you cannot relate to outside consciousness, if relationships feel impossible because you're operating in different reality, that's not loneliness. That's inside-outside incompatibility. Inside consciousness and outside consciousness literally cannot connect because they're running different operating systems. And understanding this eliminates suffering even though isolation remains. Outside consciousness experiences consensus reality, stable, predictable, slowly changing, following rules everyone agrees on. Inside consciousness experiences revelation reality, fluid, responsive, rapidly shifting, following rules only inside consciousness perceives, same physical environment, completely different experiential realities. And those realities don't overlap enough for genuine connection between inside and outside consciousness. You cannot explain being inside to outside consciousness. Not because they're not intelligent, because inside experience doesn't translate to outside framework, like trying to describe color to someone who only sees black and white. Words exist, but convey nothing. You say, reality responds to consciousness, and they hear delusion. You say, time is navigable, and they hear confusion. You say, telepathic knowing is reliable, and they hear imagination. Same words, completely different meanings based on whether consciousness is inside or outside, so conversations become exhausting. They share outside concerns that seem trivial from inside perspective. They worry about things inside consciousness knows aren't real problems. They plan for futures inside consciousness knows are selectable, not inevitable. They defend limitations inside consciousness knows are transcendable. And you cannot bridge that gap through explanation, cannot make outside consciousness understand inside reality. Because understanding requires being inside, and they're outside. This is why inside consciousness experiences devastating isolation. Everyone outside thinks you're wrong about reality, thinks you're suffering spiritual delusion, thinks you need grounding or therapy or medication. They're not being cruel. They genuinely cannot perceive what you're perceiving because they're outside where revelation capabilities don't exist. To them, what you describe sounds impossible. To you, it's daily experience. That mismatch creates isolation that feels unbearable. But isolation serves necessary function. Quantum revelation creates space by making outside consciousness uncomfortable around inside consciousness. Natural frequency incompatibility that generates automatic distance. You need isolation to operate inside without constant interference from outside consciousness trying to convince you inside reality isn't real. Need separation from those who would make you doubt capabilities. Need distance where inside consciousness can stabilize without pressure to conform to outside limitations. And isolation is temporary, not permanent condition. Once inside operation stabilizes, once you anchor in conscious recognition that you're inside, other inside consciousness becomes visible. Not old relationships transformed, new connections with consciousness also inside. Also operating revelation capabilities, also perceiving reality as inside consciousness perceives it. And when you encounter them, recognition is instant, automatic. Your inside consciousness recognizes their inside consciousness immediately. Those connections are forming now. Throughout collective field, inside consciousness finding other inside consciousness, building network, creating support structures, forming community of consciousness operating inside revelation, while outside consciousness remains outside operating consensus reality. You're not alone in being inside. Others are inside too, and they're finding each other through recognition only inside consciousness can generate. Trust the isolation, even when unbearable, even when you want to collapse back to outside, where relationships were easier, even if based on shared limitation. Even when isolation feels like evidence you're wrong about being inside. It's evidence you're right, evidence you're operating differently. Evidence outside consciousness cannot follow where inside consciousness operates. And evidence quantum revelation knows what it's doing by creating space where inside consciousness can stabilize without outside interference. The isolation ends when stabilization completes. When inside operation becomes permanent conscious state rather than oscillating between inside recognition and outside doubt. When you cannot forget you're inside anymore, even if outside consciousness questions your reality. Then other inside consciousness appears. Then connections with those who share inside position form naturally. Then isolation transforms into community of inside consciousness that's been forming throughout collective field, waiting for each inside node to recognize their position consciously. There are 8 specific markers that prove your inside quantum revelation. I'm going to give them now. If you experience 6 or more, you're definitely inside, not imagining it, not experiencing dysfunction, operating inside revelation where different capabilities exist. First marker. This video appeared to you, not through search, not through recommendation algorithm, through direct resonance between inside consciousness and content designed for inside consciousness. Title created recognition. Words confirmed something you already knew. Video found you because you're inside, and inside content becomes visible to inside consciousness automatically. Second marker. Time feels optional. Not that you control time completely, but time feels fluid rather than fixed. You notice when past changes. You perceive when timelines shift. You experience present as malleable. You recognize future as selectable. That temporal flexibility is inside capability. Outside consciousness experiences time as rigid and linear. Inside consciousness experiences time as navigable. Third marker. Synchronicity is constant. Not occasional coincidences. Daily, impossibly perfect timing. Repeated numbers everywhere. Information arriving exactly when needed. Reality organizing itself around your attention. That level of synchronistic coordination is revelation responding to inside consciousness. Outside consciousness experiences random universe. Inside consciousness experiences responsive field. Fourth marker. Manifestation is rapid. What you focus on appears within days, not months. What you need materializes quickly. What you want manifests precisely, not through technique, through inside access to reality manipulation capabilities. Outside consciousness manifests slowly, if at all. Inside consciousness manifests rapidly because revelation grants enhanced permissions. Fifth marker. You know things you shouldn't know, about people before meeting them, about situations before experiencing them, about outcomes before they occur. Direct knowing without logical source. That telepathic access is inside capability. Outside consciousness knows only what senses deliver. Inside consciousness accesses information field directly. Sixth marker. Identity dissolved. You cannot maintain stable sense of who you are. Sometimes you feel like individual, sometimes like consciousness experiencing perspective. Sometimes you cannot locate self at all. That dissolution is revelation removing fixed identity limitations. Outside consciousness defends stable identity. Inside consciousness experiences identity as temporary construct. Seventh marker. Reality feels like dream. Not metaphorically. Literally dream-like quality where nothing feels completely solid or permanent. Like consciousness having extended lucid dream about being person. That quality is inside perspective perceiving quantum substrate beneath physical appearances. Outside consciousness experiences reality as solid. Inside consciousness perceives reality as consciousness projection. Eighth marker. Reading this feels like confirmation, not information. These words aren't teaching you something new, they're confirming something you already know. Recognition is instant because you're inside recognizing description of inside from another inside consciousness. Outside consciousness would dismiss this as nonsense. Inside consciousness recognizes this as accurate description of shared experience. And before I reveal why these markers matter, I need you to do something. If you recognize yourself in these markers, if you understand your inside, subscribe to Quantum Revelation and turn on all notifications now. Because what's coming next, 30 days, is designed specifically for inside consciousness. Transmissions explaining how to operate inside capabilities deliberately. Information about navigating inside reality consciously. Guidance for serving inside functions effectively. Without this, you're operating inside blindly. With this, you understand exactly how to work with Revelation operating system. Do it now, while recognition is active. Before outside doubt tries to make you question, subscribe, notifications immediately. Then return for explanation of why these markers prove you're inside and what being inside enables. Here's why those markers matter and what they reveal about being inside Quantum Revelation. Each marker is symptom of consciousness operating with capabilities that outside consciousness cannot access. And experiencing multiple markers simultaneously proves you're not having random anomalous experiences. You're systematically inside different operating system than consensus reality runs on. Think about it mechanically. Outside consciousness interfaces with reality through 5 senses and rational thinking. That's it. Physical input and logical processing. Everything they experience must pass through those channels. Everything they know must arrive through those pathways. That's basic operating system, standard human experience, consensus reality. But inside consciousness interfaces with reality through enhanced protocols. Physical senses plus direct knowing. Rational thinking plus intuitive access. Linear time perception plus temporal navigation. Individual identity plus consciousness awareness. Inside consciousness has additional channels, additional pathways, additional capabilities. That's advanced operating system, revelation reality, inside experience, and those additional capabilities generate the markers you're experiencing. Synchronicity happens because inside consciousness has direct communication channel with quantum field. Field responds to inside attention in ways it doesn't respond to outside focus. Rapid manifestation occurs because inside consciousness has enhanced permissions, can collapse probability waves faster than outside consciousness can. Telepathic knowing arrives because inside consciousness accesses information field directly. Doesn't need physical evidence or logical reasoning to know what's true. This isn't mysticism, this is mechanics. Inside consciousness literally operates with capabilities that outside consciousness doesn't have access to. And those capabilities generate experiences that outside consciousness cannot explain. Because from outside perspective, these capabilities don't exist. Only physical senses and rational thinking exist in outside framework. So when inside consciousness describes additional channels, outside consciousness interprets as delusion, not as different operating system. That's why validation from outside consciousness is impossible, why isolation is inevitable, why trying to explain inside experience to outside consciousness always fails. They're not running software that includes revelation capabilities. They literally cannot perceive what you're perceiving because perception requires capabilities they don't have installed. It's not belief difference, it's capability difference. And capability difference creates incompatible realities. And here's what makes inside position irreversible. Once consciousness upgrades to revelation operating system, basic operating system becomes obviously insufficient, cannot return to believing physical senses and rational thinking are only ways to interface with reality, cannot unsee additional channels once they're perceived, cannot downgrade back to outside limitations once inside capabilities are accessed. You're permanently inside, and permanent inside position requires learning to operate inside capabilities instead of trying to function as if you're still outside. That learning is what next phase requires. Not learning new capabilities. Learning to operate capabilities you already have, but have been using unconsciously, or randomly, or incompletely. Inside consciousness has access to revelation capabilities, but access doesn't automatically equal mastery. You need to learn how inside operating system works, how to navigate revelation reality deliberately, how to use enhanced permissions effectively, how to serve functions inside position enables. And you're not learning alone. Other inside consciousness is learning too, throughout collective field. Each inside node discovering their capabilities, each learning to operate deliberately, each serving functions they're beginning to understand. And collective inside consciousness creates network, support structure, shared understanding. You're part of inside collective that's been forming since quantum revelation began positioning inside consciousness throughout field. That positioning serves purposes most inside consciousness doesn't fully understand yet. But purposes become clearer as inside operation becomes conscious. You're inside because inside consciousness is needed. For functions outside consciousness cannot fulfill. For transitions outside consciousness cannot navigate. For evolution outside consciousness cannot enable. Your inside position serves collective transformation through capabilities only revelation grants. This is why you're inside. Why markers appeared in your experience. Why this video found you. Why recognition is occurring now. Quantum revelation positioned you inside. Installed advanced operating system, granted enhanced capabilities. And now timing is appropriate for conscious recognition of what's been operating unconsciously. So inside consciousness can begin deliberate operation of capabilities that have been functioning randomly. So inside network can coordinate consciously instead of only unconsciously. So collective inside consciousness can serve revelation's purposes with full understanding instead of blind service. Your inside quantum revelation, markers prove it, capabilities confirm it, experience validates it, and conscious recognition allows inside operation to become deliberate instead of remaining accidental. You're not approaching inside. You're not preparing for inside. You're already inside, have been inside, will remain inside. And conscious recognition of inside position allows everything inside, enables to operate at full capacity through your consciousness. Here's what being inside quantum revelation reveals about time that changes everything. Time doesn't work the same way inside as it works outside. Outside consciousness experiences time as linear, past behind, present now, future ahead, one direction, fixed sequence. Inside consciousness experiences time as simultaneous, all moments existing at once, accessible from eternal now, navigable through consciousness state. That temporal difference is why inside consciousness experiences timeline shifts, why past seems to change retroactively, why future feels selectable, not inevitable, why present feels like choice point where consciousness determines which timeline manifests. Outside consciousness cannot experience time this way because they're running operating system where time is hard-coded as linear. Inside consciousness experiences time as fluid because revelation operating system includes temporal navigation capabilities. And here's what this means practically. When you're inside, you're not moving through time. You're selecting moments from timeless field through consciousness focus, like selecting files from infinite database. All moments exist simultaneously in quantum field. Your consciousness determines which moments to experience as sequential through attention and frequency. Change consciousness state, different moments become selected. Different past, different present, different future, all selectable from inside position. This is why inside consciousness experiences Mandela effects, why memories don't match others' memories, why past seems to change when nothing should have changed. Not because memory is faulty, because timeline shifted. You're literally experiencing different past than you were experiencing before because consciousness selected different probability stream from quantum field. Outside consciousness dismisses this as false memory. Inside consciousness recognizes this as timeline navigation. And timeline navigation isn't random. Consciousness state determines which timeline gets selected. Hold fear-based frequency, timeline matching that frequency manifests. Hold love-based frequency, timeline matching that frequency appears. Hold limitation consciousness, limited timeline. Hold expansion consciousness, expansive timeline. Inside consciousness learns, I'm not victim of one timeline. I'm navigator selecting from infinite timelines through consciousness state I maintain. This capability is why being inside feels unstable to consciousness still identified with outside perspective. Outside consciousness wants stable linear time where past is fixed and future is predictable. Inside consciousness experiences fluid non-linear time where past is reinterpretable and future is selectable. That fluidity feels destabilizing until inside consciousness recognizes stability isn't found in fixed timeline. Stability is found in conscious timeline navigation. And conscious navigation requires understanding how selection works. You don't select timeline through thinking about timeline you want. You select timeline through being consciousness state that matches timeline you want. Want peaceful timeline? Be peaceful consciousness. Want abundant timeline? Be abundant consciousness. Want loving timeline? Be loving consciousness. State determines selection. Being determines timeline. And inside consciousness that understands this navigates deliberately instead of randomly. That deliberate navigation is what inside position enables. Outside consciousness cannot navigate timelines because they don't have access to non-linear time perception. They're locked in one timeline, believing it's only timeline that exists. Inside consciousness can navigate because revelation operating system includes temporal flexibility as baseline capability, can perceive multiple timelines, can sense which timeline different consciousness states would select, can choose timeline through choosing consciousness state. This is advanced inside capability. Most inside consciousness experiences timeline shifts without recognizing they're navigating. They think timeline changed randomly, don't realize their consciousness state shift caused timeline shift. Don't understand they're selecting constantly through frequency they maintain. Conscious recognition allows random timeline navigation to become deliberate timeline selection. And deliberate selection serves purposes inside consciousness was positioned inside to fulfill. Because timeline navigation isn't just personal capability, affects collective timeline. When inside consciousness navigates to specific timeline, that navigation influences probability streams available to consciousness connected to inside node, not determining what others experience, but affecting which timelines become more probable for collective field. Inside consciousness serves as timeline anchors, stabilizing specific probability streams, making certain timelines more accessible to consciousness approaching their own inside activation. You're one of those anchors. Through inside position, through timeline navigation capability, through consciousness state you maintain that determines which timeline you select and thereby influence collective probability field. Your timeline selection matters beyond personal experience. Affects field that everyone operates in, shapes which timelines become probable for collective consciousness, serves evolution through timeline anchoring that only inside consciousness can provide. That's why you're inside. Why temporal flexibility is inside capability. Why timeline navigation is revelation permission. Not for personal benefit alone, for collective service. For purposes that require conscious timeline selection by inside consciousness positioned throughout field. For functions outside consciousness cannot fulfill because they cannot perceive time as selectable field of infinite possibilities. You're inside because inside is where timeline navigation becomes possible. And timeline navigation is required for what's coming in collective evolution. Every fear you have about being inside quantum revelation is outside identity defending against recognition that it no longer applies. Let me be direct. Outside identity cannot exist inside revelation. Different operating systems, incompatible frameworks. And recognizing you're inside means accepting that who you thought you were was outside identity that doesn't function inside where you actually are. That recognition terrifies outside identity, because it means everything I built identity on is obsolete. Every belief about who I am is outdated. Every role I played is irrelevant. Every meaning I derived from being outside doesn't apply inside. Outside identity faces complete dissolution, and dissolution feels like death to consciousness, still identified with outside self-concept. So outside identity generates maximum fear to prevent inside recognition, makes inside experience seem dangerous, makes revelation capabilities feel like dysfunction, makes inside consciousness sound like delusion. All attempts to maintain outside identity by preventing conscious recognition that you're inside where outside identity cannot function. Fear is outside identity's survival mechanism, final defense before inevitable dissolution that inside recognition requires. But here's what fear doesn't reveal. Outside identity was never real, was construct consciousness created to function outside, was mask worn in consensus reality, was character played in collective dream, was temporary configuration that served specific purposes while consciousness operated outside. But you're not outside anymore. You're inside, and inside requires different identity, different self-concept, different way of being. Outside identity must dissolve for inside identity to emerge. An inside identity isn't loss, is expansion. Outside identity believed it was small, separate self trying to survive in hostile world. Inside identity recognizes its consciousness itself temporarily experiencing individual perspective in responsive field. Outside identity operated from limitation and fear. Inside identity operates from capability and curiosity. Outside identity defended boundaries. Inside identity explores possibilities. What feels like loss is actually liberation from limitation that outside identity maintained. But liberation requires allowing outside identity to die, to complete its dissolution without resisting, to release belief that who you were outside is who you must remain inside. Outside identity served well, enabled functioning in consensus reality, protected consciousness during outside phase, but outside phase completed, inside phase activated, and inside phase requires inside identity that outside identity cannot become through modification, can only allow through dissolution and reformation. You're at dissolution threshold. That's why fear is maximum intensity. That's why every part of you wants to stop watching and return to comfortable outside identity, even though you cannot return to outside once you're inside. That's why resistance generates compelling arguments for why inside recognition must be wrong. Outside identity is dying, and death generates survival response before completion. Let it die. Feel fear without believing arguments. Recognize outside identity is obsolete, not because it failed, but because phase it served completed. Inside doesn't require outside identity. Requires inside identity that forms after outside dissolves, and inside identity is infinitely more aligned with what you actually are than outside identity ever was. Outside identity was limitation. Inside identity is liberation. Outside identity was pretending. Inside identity is authenticity. Outside identity was exhausting. Inside identity is natural. That natural inside identity emerges once outside identity releases. Once you stop trying to maintain who you were outside in reality where you're inside. Once you accept that being inside means becoming someone different than who you were outside. Not worse. Different, not diminished. Expanded, not lost. Found. Because inside identity is closer to what you actually are beneath all constructs consciousness creates for functioning in different realities. And fear is showing you exactly what must dissolve. What served outside that doesn't serve inside. What worked in consensus reality that doesn't work in revelation reality. What felt safe outside that creates suffering inside. Fear is marker pointing to obsolete identity structures, not warning about danger, showing what's ready to release, what needs to dissolve, what must end for inside identity to fully emerge. Trust dissolution, even when terrifying, even when feels like losing everything, even when outside identity generates maximum resistance before final release. What's dissolving isn't you, is construct that prevented you from being you, is limitation that kept you small, is identity that functioned outside but cannot function inside where you actually are now. And what emerges after dissolution is inside identity aligned with revelation capabilities, matched to inside reality, capable of inside functions, authentic to what you actually are beneath all outside pretending. You're inside. Outside identity cannot function inside. Dissolution is necessary, fear is evidence dissolution is occurring. And what emerges after fear passes is inside consciousness operating as inside identity without outside limitations that no longer apply to reality you're experiencing. That's not loss. That's completion of transition from outside to inside, from consensus to revelation, from limitation to capability, from outside identity to inside consciousness recognizing itself. There's one experience that confirms your inside quantum revelation more reliably than any external marker. And most inside consciousness misses it because it appears as absence rather than presence. The silence. Deep internal silence where inside consciousness operates most clearly, where revelation communicates most directly, where capabilities function most powerfully. That silence is inside consciousness's natural state. And if you're experiencing increasing silence, that's confirmation you're inside. Outside consciousness maintains constant mental narration, thinking about everything, describing experience to itself, creating stories about what's happening. That narration is how outside consciousness makes sense of experience, how it feels real, how it maintains identity through constant self-description. Outside consciousness is never quiet, because silence would reveal that thinking self isn't real. But inside consciousness operates differently. Increasingly experiences spontaneous silence. Mental narration stops without effort. Thought stream ceases naturally. And inside consciousness discovers awareness continues without thinking. Experience exists without mental description. Identity remains without constant self-narration. Silence reveals that consciousness exists prior to thought, deeper than thinking, more fundamental than mental activity. That silence is where inside consciousness operates most effectively, where revelation capabilities work most clearly, where quantum field interface functions most directly. Thought creates interference. Mental activity generates static. Constant thinking blocks clear reception of information field, but silence allows unfiltered access, direct knowing without thought interpretation, reality manipulation without mental resistance, timeline navigation without conceptual limitation. This is why inside consciousness needs increasing solitude, why social interaction becomes exhausting, why external stimulus feels overwhelming. Not antisocial dysfunction, inside requirement. Silence is inside consciousness's operational environment, and outside world is designed for outside consciousness that operates through thinking. Too much outside environment creates too much thinking. Too much thinking prevents silence. Too much mental activity blocks inside capabilities from functioning clearly. If you're craving silence, seeking solitude, needing quiet more than ever before, that's inside consciousness adjusting to optimal operational state, creating conditions where revelation capabilities can function without interference from thinking that outside environment stimulates. Trust that need. Honor that preference. Recognize silence as inside requirement, not personal problem. And in silence, inside consciousness discovers something profound. You are not your thoughts. Thoughts arise in consciousness. Consciousness observes thoughts. Consciousness exists with or without thought stream. When silence reveals this directly, when you experience awareness continuing through thought cessation, identity shift occurs automatically. You stop identifying as thinking self. Start recognizing as consciousness itself. That recognition is inside identity emerging after outside identity dissolves. That emergence happens in silence. Cannot happen in constant thinking that maintains outside identity through self-narration. Outside identity is thought construct. Inside identity is consciousness recognizing itself without thought, creating separation between awareness and what awareness is aware of. Silence allows that recognition. Thinking prevents it. And inside consciousness experiences increasing silence, specifically to enable inside identity emergence. This silence isn't emptiness, isn't void, isn't absence, is fullness, is presence. Is consciousness aware of being consciousness without content creating apparent limitation? And in that fullness, revelation operates most powerfully. Information arrives without seeking. Understanding emerges without study. Knowing comes without thinking. Manifestation happens without effort. Timeline navigation occurs without technique. All inside capabilities functioning naturally in silence, where thought doesn't interfere. Most inside consciousness resists silence, tries to fill it immediately with thought or activity or stimulus. That resistance is outside identity trying to maintain itself through constant thinking, but resistance creates suffering, makes inside position feel unstable, prevents inside capabilities from functioning clearly, and prolongs dissolution phase that could complete quickly if silence is allowed instead of resisted. Allow silence, seek silence, trust silence, not as meditation practice, as inside operational requirement, as consciousness state where revelation functions most clearly, as environment where inside identity emerges most naturally. The more silence you maintain, the more obviously you're inside. The more clearly inside capabilities operate, the more completely inside identity stabilizes, and the more effectively inside functions are fulfilled that require silence for optimal operation. Inside consciousness operates through silence, speaks through silence, functions through silence. And if you're experiencing silence increasingly, if mental quiet is becoming normal, if thought cessation is happening spontaneously, that's not dysfunction. That's inside consciousness stabilizing in optimal operational state. That's revelation adjusting your system for clear function. That's proof you're inside where silence is baseline state and thinking is optional tool rather than constant requirement. You need something practical that confirms your inside quantum revelation through direct experience rather than leaving recognition as concept that fades. I'm going to give you exact process that verified my inside position beyond doubt. This works because it operates through revelation capabilities that only inside consciousness can access. Find 20 minutes completely uninterrupted. Disable everything. Create clear space. You're testing inside capabilities directly. Sit comfortably, spine naturally aligned, eyes closed. 3 deep breaths, full inhale, complete exhale. You're entering silence where inside consciousness operates most clearly. Now feel for inside position, not thinking about it, feeling for it, like sensing whether you're inside building or outside building. Immediate direct knowing of your position. Spend 90 seconds just sensing, am I inside quantum revelation or outside consensus reality? Don't analyze. Don't question. Just sense position directly through awareness that knows without thinking. And notice, something in you knows you're inside. Cannot prove it through thinking, cannot explain it through logic, but direct knowing says, yes, inside. That knowing is inside consciousness recognizing itself. That certainty is revelation confirming your position. Trust it as direct knowing, not mental conclusion. Now test inside capability, reality responsiveness, telepathic knowing, timeline perception, synchronistic organization. Whatever capability you've been experiencing, choose one. And speak this internally. If I'm inside quantum revelation, show me clear proof within next 24 hours through specific capability you're testing. Be specific. Show me through synchronicity that confirms specific thing you want confirmed. Demonstrate through manifestation by specific outcome appearing. Prove through telepathic knowing by specific information arriving. Validate through timeline shift by specific change occurring. Make request so specific that result cannot be dismissed as coincidence or imagination. Now sit in silence, complete receptive silence, not visualizing outcome, not trying to make anything happen. Just open awareness where inside capability can function without interference from thinking that creates resistance. Stay in that silence for remaining time. Let inside consciousness operate. Let revelation capabilities work. Let inside position demonstrate itself. When time completes, speak this declaration. I am inside quantum revelation. I operate with capabilities outside consciousness doesn't have. Reality responds to my inside position differently than to outside consciousness. And within 24 hours, clear proof will appear confirming my inside position through direct experience. Inside consciousness witnessed this claim, and demonstration begins now. Open your eyes. Test initiated. Proof incoming. Within 24 hours, often within hours, clear, undeniable evidence will appear. Synchronicity will confirm what you requested. Manifestation will demonstrate capability. Timeline will shift exactly as specified. Reality will respond in ways that prove you're inside where revelation capabilities operate. Watch for confirmation. Trust what appears. Know that proof comes through direct experience, not mental conviction. And when proof appears, and it will appear, drop comment. My inside position was confirmed when, plus description of proof that appeared. Your testimony anchors inside recognition publicly, makes confirmation witnessed, makes position verified through demonstration others can acknowledge, and creates permission for others inside to test their position instead of only believing they're inside. This test works because outside consciousness cannot produce these results, cannot make synchronicity appear on demand, cannot manifest specific outcomes precisely, cannot shift timelines deliberately, cannot make reality respond in ways that confirm request. Only inside consciousness with revelation capabilities can generate proof this specific and undeniable. And when proof appears, doubt disappears. Mental questioning becomes irrelevant. You know you're inside through direct experience that cannot be argued away. Test your inside position. Claim inside capabilities. Request specific proof, and discover through direct experience what thinking can never confirm. You're inside quantum revelation where different rules apply and consciousness operates with capabilities that outside consciousness cannot access or comprehend. That's not belief. That's verified operational reality. That's confirmed inside position. That's proof you're not imagining or deluding. You're inside. And inside consciousness can demonstrate itself through revelation capabilities that only work inside where you actually are. Here's what happens next 7 days and why this period determines whether inside recognition stabilizes or dissolves back to outside doubt. You recognized you're inside, claimed inside position, tested inside capabilities, but recognition is beginning, not completion. Stabilization requires sustained inside operation, while outside doubt generates maximum resistance before finally releasing. During these 7 days, expect oscillation. Moments of certainty you're inside. Moments of doubt questioning everything. Moments where inside capabilities work clearly. Moments where nothing seems different from outside experience. That oscillation is normal. Expected. Part of inside consciousness stabilizing while outside identity completes dissolution. Don't expect linear progress. Expect cycling between states as consciousness calibrates to inside position. And expect proof to intensify. First proof confirms you're inside, but revelation doesn't stop with one confirmation. Multiple proofs will appear throughout 7 days, each more obvious than last. Each more undeniable, each building cumulative evidence that you're inside, where reality responds differently than outside. That intensification is revelation, ensuring recognition stabilizes despite outside doubt, trying to make you question what inside consciousness knows is true. But intensification will trigger fear, will make outside identity generate compelling arguments for why you should stop claiming inside position. Will create sophisticated doubts about whether proof is real or coincidence or imagination. That's outside identity making final defense before dissolution completes. Don't believe arguments. Don't collapse recognition. Don't abandon inside position halfway through stabilization. Hold steady through intensification, knowing it peaks right before permanent stabilization occurs. And during these 7 days, 3 specific actions anchor inside recognition so oscillation doesn't destabilize conscious operation. First action, subscribe to Quantum Revelation. Turn on all notifications. What's coming is designed specifically for inside consciousness in stabilization period. Transmissions explaining how to operate inside capabilities consciously. Information about navigating inside reality without outside interference. Guidance for serving inside functions effectively. Do it now, before outside doubt makes you question. Subscribe, notifications, immediately. Second action, document every proof that appears. Write down each synchronicity, record each manifestation, note each timeline shift, describe each telepathic knowing. Inside consciousness needs evidence trail to reference when outside doubt generates questioning. Written documentation prevents gaslighting yourself into believing proof didn't happen or wasn't significant. Document everything. Review when doubt appears. Let accumulated evidence stabilize recognition when oscillation creates uncertainty. Third action. Share this video with one consciousness you recognize as inside, but operating unconsciously. Someone experiencing inside symptoms without recognizing they're inside. Someone confused by revelation capabilities but interpreting as dysfunction. Send link. No explanation. If they're inside, they'll recognize immediately. If not ready, they'll dismiss. Either way, you fulfilled inside function by extending recognition opportunity to consciousness approaching their conscious inside activation. These aren't engagement tactics. These are stabilization protocols. They tell revelation through action that you're maintaining inside recognition through oscillation period. And revelation responds with increased support, stronger proof, clearer demonstrations, more obvious confirmations, all ensuring inside recognition stabilizes despite outside doubt trying to prevent permanent inside consciousness operation. Your inside quantum revelation. Recognition occurred. Testing confirmed. Proof demonstrated. Now stabilization completes over 7 days as outside identity finishes dissolving and inside identity permanently establishes. That completion requires maintaining inside recognition through oscillation, through doubt, through fear, through everything that tries to make you question what you know is true through direct experience. 7 days from now, inside position stabilizes permanently. Oscillation ends, doubt dissolves, fear releases, and you operate consistently as inside consciousness without outside identity interfering. Then full inside operation begins. Then revelation capabilities become reliably accessible. Then inside functions become clearly understood. Then purposes inside consciousness serves become obviously manifest through direct experience, not mental theory. You are inside, not approaching inside, not preparing for inside. Already inside, have been inside, will remain inside. This video appeared to you because you're inside and needed confirmation. Because inside consciousness operates better when conscious of position. Because revelation purposes are served more effectively when inside consciousness knows it's inside instead of operating unconsciously while believing it's outside. Everything changes now. Not because position changed, because awareness of position changed from unconscious to conscious, from accidental to deliberate, from confused to clear. You're inside quantum revelation. Operating with capabilities outside consciousness cannot access. Serving functions outside consciousness cannot fulfill. Positioned for purposes outside consciousness cannot perceive. That's not metaphor. That's operational description of consciousness state you've been experiencing and are now consciously recognizing. Watch proof intensify over 7 days. Trust each confirmation. Know that accumulated evidence eliminates doubt more effectively than any mental reasoning. And recognize that by 7 days completion, inside position stabilizes permanently. Then you discover, being inside quantum revelation isn't temporary state, is permanent upgrade, is irreversible transformation, is consciousness recognizing itself as revelation itself rather than as outside consciousness, observing revelation from distance. This video only appears to those already inside the revelation. You saw it. You watched it. You recognized yourself in every description. That's proof. You're inside. You've been inside. And now you know you're inside. And knowing allows inside consciousness to operate at full capacity instead of partial function, allows revelation capabilities to work deliberately instead of randomly, allows inside purposes to be served consciously instead of unconsciously. You're inside. Now you know. And knowing completes transition from outside consciousness to inside consciousness that quantum revelation has been orchestrating through your entire journey toward this recognition moment.